it's very clear, I think, to everybody, and this is not a partisan position. This is just, I think, it's commonsensical, that we're in a situation where the military, Canadian military, is taking on a very different role than they have traditionally taken on. And several people have alluded to this in their comments. And of course, this has to be explained to the people somehow. And the military are quite open about the fact that this is a challenge for them to communicate to the public. The commander of Canadian Forces, General Hillier, has been interviewed on radio and television and print, and is quite open about the fact that he sees this as a significant challenge for him. And he talks about the need to have the correct perception about what's happening and why the Canadian military are in Afghanistan and doing what they're doing. And he also commented in the interview that I heard him saying that soldiers who return from active duty in Afghanistan are encouraged to talk in their communities about what they're doing. So there's quite a very clear, open, understanding that there's a challenge out there to communicate this new role. And so that the people who do that, of course, are the media. That's their job, is to communicate information to us. How else would we find out about it? Of course, some of us have the opportunity to talk to individuals who are come back from Afghanistan, but most of us don't have that opportunity. We rely on print, radio or television media to tell us about it. So that was the inspiration for tonight's topic. Is we're not really going to maybe directly get into questions of whether we should be there or not, or what we're doing is right or wrong. It's more as how is the role being communicated by the media, the new role for Canada's military. That's kind of what I'm hoping to be the focus of our presentation.
The struggle to democratize media both from within and without. But first let me ask you if anybody can tell me what this picture is about. Anybody who didn't see the November 15th sun, what's that a picture of? Anybody? A happy soldier?
Black soldier.
Okay, happy black soldier. Anyone else? What's the context? Ah, you see, there you got it. Okay. Yeah. But maybe you saw it already?
Yes, I.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you think it's it looks like a soldier, a Canadian soldier, maybe driving in a tank out of Kandahar or something. In fact, it's the Lions rolling into Winnipeg. Okay. It's part of the Grey Cup. What does it say? Players don military garb to kick off Grey Cup week. So that tells us something right there, I think. And I don't mean to pick on the Vancouver Sun, particularly since Francis is here, but that was, this is, generally, I mean, that's true of the media in general, right? That the Canadian government and the armed forces are on a very aggressive image-making and recruiting campaign right now. And I think it's not too much of an exaggeration to say it's little short of trying to, in a sense, remake the culture and move Canada towards a more American-type militarist culture, if you like. But let me turn, first of all, to the bigger context of what Bill Carroll and I argue in the Remaking Media book is a democratic deficit of the media overall. And we looked at Canada, Britain, and the United States. And that was the original title of this talk, actually, wasn't it? The original theme was democracy in the media. And I think that's the sort of broader context about what are the media for, how well are they functioning in terms of sustaining democratic self-governance. So in the book, we start out by identifying themes from the critical literature on the media, 8 themes, which we argue adds up to an enormous democratic deficit. The first theme is the media's failure to help constitute a democratic public sphere because of the trivialization of news, conflicts of interest due to conglomeration, the decline, especially in the United States, of the public service ethos in broadcasting and other media. Secondly, the centralization of political and symbolic power, which is a byproduct of media convergence and concentration and is only partly offset by the networking tendencies of the internet. Thirdly, the media's reproduction and sometimes intensification of inequalities of language, ethnicity, gender, and class, because after all, the logic of democracy is one person, one vote, but the logic of the market is $1, one vote. That's very different, okay? So a commercial media system gives disproportionate weight to those audiences, target audiences that advertisers want to reach, which is generally the affluent, right? So they have more say in determining what kind of media survive and thrive in a commercial environment. The fourth theme is that of homogenization, the similarity of values due to the structural pressures on media, such as the rationalization that takes place of resources within corporate media empires, or their commercial dependence on promoting a culture of narcissistic consumerism, as I believe Bill McKibben, an environmentalist writer, has put it. A fifth theme is the declining sense of community, including the disconnection between radio in the United States and local communities. There's almost no local radio news left, really, with the expansion of corporate empires that just program music out of their corporate headquarters. But also, one arguably, and I'll come back to this, the decline or the failure to build and sustain communities that are transnational in scope, which I think is what we need today. Sixth theme is the enclosure of public knowledge through intellectual property regimes. Seventh, the policy-making elitism, the secrecy and even corruption of communication policy-making, again, especially in the United States. And if you want to follow up more on that, there's about a dozen books now written by Robert W. McChesney that I strongly recommend having a look at, books such as Rich Media, Poor Democracy. An eighth theme is declining privacy and free expression rights and more surveillance, especially since the 9/11 attacks. But I'm wondering, since we wrote the book, and it just came out 6 months ago, whether we should follow up what some of the activists we interviewed mentioned was an emerging theme, and that is the militarization of reporting. Now, over the years, as I said, I'm a co-director of Newswatch Canada, which is a media monitoring project at SFU that was set up originally in 1993. And during the 1990s, we attempted to identify what were the major sort of issues or blind spots in Canada's media that really were not getting adequate coverage overall. And we had a system of identifying stories and sending them out to a panel to rank and so on. And we identified themes such as environmental degradation as a systemic problem, religion and traditional social values and their continued importance in Canada's political culture, white-collar and corporate crime, which costs as much as street and violent crime. It gets only 1/10 or less of the coverage. The power of the public relations industry, labor news in general, poverty and class inequality, alternatives and consequences of the market liberal agenda of privatization, media corporations' own interests and biases, but we also identified as one of those themes, one of those blind spots, the dark side of Canada's involvement in militarism, such as military pollution. Apparently about 12% of the world's pollution is attributable to military activities. The impact of military life on the wives of armed forces husbands. There was a very good book on that in the 90s, and that's a theme you just didn't hear very much in the news itself. The apparent cover-up of Canadian soldiers' Gulf War-related illnesses. So that happened in Canada, not just the U.S. And we wrote in the book, by the way, it's another book, The Missing News, which coincidentally happens to be available here for a modest discount on the book table. We wrote in that book that relatively few journalists have any real ties to the military and thus depend heavily on official PR sources or on news contacts within the government for news about military operations. This discourages most journalists from doing the legwork necessary to uncover stories concerning the hidden consequences of military practices and policies. Well, I think that was the 90s, okay? I think in the last couple of years, that's changed, right? We now have many more journalists directly covering the military, but arguably many of them are what they call in the U.S. embedded journalists. They can certainly convey some sense of Canadian troops' achievements and challenges on the ground, but that's not the same thing as a critical coverage of the policies that frame military activities that Canada is involved in.